Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Welcome. Our topic this week is called Holiday Grit Guide, when the holidays are hard. And so many holiday gift guides coming out at this time of year. Obviously wanted to do a little play on that for those of you who might be having harder holidays, and maybe the holiday season is always hard, and this is whatever holidays you celebrate. I think this time of year, this is like when all the messaging begins about what the holidays should look like and feel like, and regardless of whether you celebrate every particular holiday or not, it's like social media feeds, commercials, everything is geared toward this time of year, and it can be really tough for people. It's one of the times that people feel the most alone is during the holiday season, and there are so many different factors that I think contribute to that feeling. One of them is just the passage of time, right? Like, when we're reminded that time is passing in this collective way, which is why New Year's Eve, people tend to make their resolutions. It's just like a marker. And so when this time of year arrives, it's just like a little reminder, oh, we're here again. And whenever we have those collective sort of like reminders, it, just natural human response is to sort of think about like, okay, another year has gone by, where is my life, how are things looking? And whatever the distance is, and this is not just during the holidays, this is any time of year, whatever the distance is between like how you thought things would be or how you think things should be and how they actually are, whatever that space is, that's the space where we tend to really suffer and ruminate, and that's where longing occurs. That's where comparing and contrasting lives, like all that stuff in there. If there is any kind of shame, or if there's big grief, or whatever the bigger, harder feelings are, that's where they live. They live in that space between how we want things to be and how things actually are. And one of the real challenges always as a human being is to try to face reality as it is, and it is not always going to be as we want it to be or as we thought it would be. And so that attachment attachment leads to suffering. This is something that we know. That attachment to those ideas of how we want things to be really can create a lot of suffering for people. Comparing and contrasting is one of the most guaranteed ways to make yourself feel awful. But again, it's really human, and culturally it's something we're sort of encouraged to do all the time. That's a big part of the problem with social media, is that people are, signing on and scrolling and seeing all of these like photos of people with their families, and everything looks amazing. And, there's always someone running through the fall leaves, or like, giant table full of smiling people that looks idyllic. A lot of the time, it's like things are not always as they seem to be, which is not to say, hopefully there are a lot of people who are really, very happy right now, and who do have families that they love and that they, are excited to visit. But the reality is, a lot of people, most people, familial relationships are complicated. And anytime you get a large group of people together, it's going to be complicated. And with family stuff, it's that much more intense, because these are the people who've known you forever. There are often dynamics that are, they've been set up, they're decades old. You may have grown and moved on, but when you go back home, it's like there's that sort of regression where you become your 15-year-old self again. Um, if you're going to be triggered, it's probably going to happen in that context. You know, the people who set up the motherboard, right? They know how to like push the buttons and pull the strings. And so it just can be a really tough time of year for people. And then additionally, if you're going through, if there's someone that you've lost, you know, if you're grieving someone, holidays can just kind of bring up all of that sadness, you know, that that person is not at your table. And I feel my mother around me all the time. Thankfully, I didn't for the first year, but things shifted right around the 10-month mark. Actually, after her death, some things happened, and I felt a shift, and I do feel her I feel her with me all the time, you know. But it doesn't mean that I can't pick up the phone and call her. I can't hear her voice. I can't fly to New York and see her, give her a hug, or, you know, for years and years and years living in Los Angeles, if I was driving by myself somewhere alone in my car, like if I would have dropped my kids off at school, that would be a typical time I would call my mom. And for the first, 6 months after she passed, I can't tell you how many times I went to call my mom and then realized I couldn't do that. And so, you know, even if you do feel the person that you have lost, even if you do feel them with you and near you in some way, it's still really painful to not be able to see them and hear them, you know, and hug them. And so a lot of people suffer a little extra around holidays, times they would typically see this person, be with this person, or, you know, celebrate with this person. It's painful. And then there are the other kinds of loss that can happen. So, you know, I was writing about this in the personal essay this week, that like after my first marriage ended, you know, after the divorce, I had 2 tiny kids. My daughter was 18 months old. My son was 4 years old. And he was the same age I was when my parents split. You know, it was the very last thing I wanted for my kids. And the holidays were, you know, it was rough for the first few years for me. I did everything in my power to make things good for them, and to really do things differently than they had been done in my life and in my world. I knew what that felt like to have your holidays split, and sometimes there's no way around it. You know, if it's an acrimonious situation, it's really sad, and it's the saddest for the kids. But when you are able to be, you know, when you're able to put the kids first, you can really mitigate a lot of it. I don't think you can mitigate all of it, but you can certainly lessen the degree to which the kids are struggling and suffering because of something that really had nothing to do with them. And so I definitely, you know, did everything in my power to make the holidays beautiful and wonderful and stress-free and full of love, and, you know, and all of that. And so, but sometimes that's what you're dealing with. Your family structure doesn't look the way that you thought that it would, you know. You've lost someone, you know, in this other context, or you've lost this picture you had of how things were going to look and how things were going to be and how things were going to feel. And that can be really painful. And the single parent holidays can be really tough for people. You know, you check on your friends. It's a time where you can feel really alone, especially if you have little kids, because you're doing everything by yourself, and, you know, there might not be anybody kind of like checking in on you to see how you're doing. So I remember that very well. And then there are other, you know, things that can create a lot of pain for people around this time, and some of them have to do with very difficult familial relationships. If you love an addict, like, for example, as my mother, like, I talked about this and written about this extensively, but, you know, she's an alcoholic. I mean, I loved her with my entire being. But it was really hard. And holidays were really hard and stressful because there was always going to be alcohol. It was just a given that she would be drinking. And so it was really a question of how much and like at what time in the day were things going to take a turn, and was it just going to be a situation where she was sloppy and it was sort of like uncomfortable and just deeply upsetting, or was it going to get ugly? Like you never knew. I never knew, and so it was stressful. They were stressful, and I was writing about. I mean, some of the funnier things were like just the her time, her perception of time. I mean, she'd be like at the beginning of getting ready, and my stepdad would be in the car ready to go, and she'd just be like showering. So I mean, there would be like an hour and a half, 2 hour stretch of time where things were going to get really tense. And growing up, my stepdad, his response to that would be, he would just sort of like, here we go. And, we wouldn't be anywhere close to leaving. So, and my brother and I would know, like, oh boy, like he is ready and she's like not even nearly ready. And this is going to get, the tension, which is going to get higher and higher. So, I'm sure that in your own families, you have dynamics that you can look at and think about and hopefully laugh about, but some of them might not be so funny. And when you love people when you love an addict, that is really, really painful. And sometimes it's like a situation where you really have to step back. And sometimes you love people who just don't, there's like gaslighting, or there's a lack of empathy that is kind of on a cellular level, like the person just does not possess the ability to put themselves in your shoes or anyone else's shoes. You might love somebody with a serious personality disorder, and that's really painful, and there are so many people who struggle going home for the holidays because they have a sibling who's going to be really unpleasant or disrespectful or cruel, and then sort of gaslight, just like, wow, you're so sensitive, you're still so sensitive, whatever it is. It's like enraging, and or people who have expressed, hey, could you please not, like this really hurts my feelings, or really makes me uncomfortable, could you not do that, and they do it anyway. So if you have people in your family who are consistently cruel and unwilling to hear you and unwilling to respect your, if they're reasonable requests, like then you get into that area of like, what do I need to do here for my own well-being? What makes sense? And sometimes what it means is I'm going to celebrate the holidays with my chosen family and see the family members who are good to me on different days. And that's hard, sometimes you have like a parental figure who just doesn't want to see that or deal with it, won't acknowledge it, and sometimes the parental figure is the person causing the issue. So all these things can be very hard on people, and that feeling of being alone, feeling alienated, feeling left out, it's a rough one. And I mean, I don't know how many of you noticed yesterday how many people in your feeds were expressing the holidays are so hard for me. This is the time of year where I feel really alone, or this is the time of year where I miss my mom so much, or I can't go home because I have a sibling who is just awful to me and my parents won't step in, or my parents are divorced. I'm talking about grown people now with maybe their own kids who are still trying to figure out how to split the holiday to make everyone happy. At a certain point, you gotta look at your own well-being and you take care of yourself. You're no good to anyone if you are contorting yourself emotionally and mentally to try to please other people. I cannot tell you how many people I've known over the years, worked with, who have miserable holidays because they're bending over backwards to make everyone else happy, and by the end of it they're exhausted. I think that, it's reasonable at a certain point in time to say, like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. And, if you're talking about, let's say, a grown child of divorce, right? So now you have two sets of grandparents. You've got, and maybe there's remarriage, and then there's the step parents' families, and it just gets exceedingly complicated. And then let's say that person has gotten married, right? And they have their own kids, and then there's that person's family. Like, how many people are you supposed to be able to see in a day? And how many people can you possibly make happy and satisfy? And what about you and like your children? Like, eventually there's got to be some kind of compromise, some kind of understanding on everyone's parts, that like, if there isn't going to be a scenario where 40 people can descend on one house, then maybe it's not, maybe there has to be a number of days where people are seeing each other instead of just the one day. So there's a lot of pressure on people, and a lot of loneliness, I think, and anxiety and longing. And to really try to be gentle with yourself if you're heading into a season that is typically hard for you. To just be gentle with yourself, to draw lines if you need to think about whether it makes sense to go home for the holidays, or if you're going to do that, like, are there any ways that you can make the experience less stressful? Maybe it's staying in a hotel if possible, or staying with a friend. What can you do if you choose to, if you're walking into a difficult situation, what can you do to make it a little less difficult for yourself? And what boundaries can you draw? And if those boundaries aren't going to be respected, then you get to decide what you want to do and how you want to handle that. So there's that. And the other thing that I really wanted to highlight in this talk is the attachment we have to how things should be during the holidays in particular, but really at any time. And sometimes what happens for people is, there's this thought that, like, okay, well, when I'm 30, I'll be married. And then if you're like 29 and you haven't met anyone, it's like, and maybe all your friends are getting married, but that can start to really drive people to make choices and decisions that are just not gonna, pan out well. And that should, right? Like, don't should on yourself. It's such a powerful thing. I think, again, culturally, there's so much, pressure put on all of us to hit certain markers at certain times. And the reality is, most people I know, they don't, there is no timeline like that, because life doesn't work that way. You can force it. You can sort of look around at 29 and just pick the nearest person and say, okay, look at my watch, it's time to get married. But if if it's not something that's naturally flowed and happened, it's probably not going to go well. And so trying to really look at what are the stories and the pictures that I'm attached to here, and in what ways am I shoulding on myself. And sometimes people stay in situations that are deeply soul crushing because they're attached to, well, this is how, I've made these choices, and this is how things are, and this is how it has to be, and I'm stuck now. You're never stuck. And most people's lives don't unfold exactly the way they thought they were going to. Most things don't go according to plan. And sometimes you just have to remember that each human being, like you yourself, you're complicated, you're growing, you're changing, you're evolving. How you feel about things today may not be how you feel about them in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And if you look 5, 10, 15 years in your rearview mirror, you'll know that that's the case. We keep changing, and so does everyone else. And so, you never know how the people around you are going to feel and grow and change and evolve. And hopefully, if we're talking about a partnership, right, you're going to grow together, but it doesn't always go that way. And sometimes one person's growing in one direction and the other person is stuck, or they're growing in the opposite direction. It's not working anymore. And that's a very sad painful part of life, and loss is a painful, loss is something that we're all going to deal with. And there are people who are grieving losses that are just brutal. Losing my mother was without a doubt the most painful thing I've been through in my life. It happened really unexpectedly. Somebody who never went to the doctor, she was never sick, and then she suddenly got ALS, and it really came out of left field, and it just took her. It ravaged her. It was merciless, and it just took her. It just took everything from her, and then it took her. And so it was a shocking turn of events. It was devastating to watch and not be able to, do very much. I did everything anyone could. We all did, but it's it's just, other than advocate for the person and try to figure out what you can do to help and to ease the suffering, you're watching this person that you love just become wasted. But she's my mother. She was always going to go before me in the natural order of things. There are people struggling with loss, like loss of a child, where the loss is so deep, they're carrying it forever. It's a forever heartbreak. And my cousin lost his 6-year-old son to brain cancer. And I saw that happen when I was 25, and it really had such an impact on me. It really drove home the lesson of how vulnerable we all are and how fragile it is. And to try your best to, recognize that most people are struggling with the intense vulnerability that is part of being human, and the pain that comes with the best things that we get here, in my opinion, on earth, right, as human beings. The best things we get are connection with other people, with love. It's such a beautiful part of the human experience, being able to love other people and cherish them and support them and nurture them, and try to create this environment where there's just so much joy. And when that is ripped away from you, it's nothing's going to be the same after that. And the job then is to figure out, how do I keep going? How do I keep going, and how do I somehow at some point use this incredible loss that I don't really know how I'm going to survive? How do I use that to maybe help other people? That's what my cousin's wife has done. She began volunteering at a hospital working with parents who have terminally ill children, because she's been there. So she can have those conversations, and nobody would want to be in that. No one would want that. No one would want that insight, but if that is what has occurred in your life, to try to figure out what possible beauty can I possibly, draw from this once I've figured out how to put one foot in front of the other again. And being able to have conversations and hold somebody else's hand and be a light in a situation like that is beautiful, and sometimes human beings are asked to face extraordinary, devastating, knifing loss, and to really try your best to recognize that. And if you have people who've been through loss like that in your life, to check in, to reach out, is so helpful, especially at the holiday time of year. Most people would love to talk about the person they've lost, to call them by name. A lot of times people are afraid to check in on people who are grieving, because they don't want, what if this person's having a good day and then I remind them? You're not They're never forgetting. There's not a moment of any day that they're forgetting. And giving people like that an opportunity to talk about the person they've lost, to call them by name, to say things that they miss about them, or to express, is just, you're helping, you know? So that's just something to know. And if you're one of those people, my heart like goes out to you, and I'm always here, you know, always. So that, and just to, you know, to try to realize that whether you go through like that kind of just devastating loss, or the more, you know, typical losses that we're all going through, whatever they might be, the loss of the story we had in our head of how things were going to be or look, just kindness, you know, toward yourself and toward other people is so helpful and needed. And being able to say things, you know, speak things. It's like you take the power away when you can just say a thing like, I'm feeling really lonely right now, or I'm grieving right now, or I'm feeling really alone right now. Giving yourself and other people the space to do that. A lot of people struggle asking for help. It's not an uncommon quality in people. And there's, you know, depending on what we're talking about here, sometimes people don't want to like bring other people down. It's always good form to just check on the people around you. Things might look a certain way, doesn't mean they are a certain way. And to be able to be that person, you know, that someone might feel comfortable texting and being like, hey, do you have any time this week for a coffee or a walk, you know? To check on your single friends during these times, people who are living alone, maybe by choice. You know, sometimes people are actively not looking for partnership, but then it's hard on the holidays. And to, I don't know, just try to have more empathy for yourself and other people, and recognize that a lot of family dynamics are complicated, not easy, and a lot of the suffering that we have is a result of feeling like other people, you know, most other people we know are having a different experience than we're having. You know, I would feel that sometimes on Mother's Day, you know, like the Mother's Day cards. I used to struggle to like find one that felt right, because my mother wanted the Mother's Day card that's like, you're my best friend and you're my champion, and mom, you've always been there for me. But I couldn't, that wasn't the kind of relationship that we had. And so, you know, and Father's Day was like, I really couldn't find a card for my dad that fit ever, you know. So giving yourself the space to mourn and grieve what you didn't have is what's going to help you release the longing, you know, just acknowledging your own sadness and your own grief over not having what you wanted is okay. It's needed, you know. And so to know that you're really not alone in that. And boundaries, especially if we're talking about loving people who are addicts, or who you know, are gonna run roughshod over your boundaries, like then it might be a thing where you really don't want to set yourself up for a holiday like that. And it's hard. I know it's really hard, because it might mean, you know, say I'm not going to come home this year, or I'm, you know, going to come home, but I'm actually going to spend the day with X, and then like I'll see you the next day, or whatever it is. You know, people may not like that, especially if there's been a dynamic in the family that you're just supposed to take it no matter what it looks like, you know. If you start to say, yeah, I'm not going to accept that anymore, I'm not going to set myself up to be on the firing line like that, your family probably won't like that very much. You know, a lot of the time when you start to try to shift a family dynamic, people rebel, they resist, they don't like it, because you can't change other people. We know this, right? But if you start to change yourself and what you're willing to tolerate or not tolerate, there are repercussions that do affect other people. And for example, like with my mom, you know, I told her over the years, like, I don't want to be around you when you're drinking. Well, I realized pretty quickly, like, she would say okay, and then we would, I'd come and see her and she'd be drinking. Like, that wasn't gonna happen. So I realized that, okay, if those boundaries aren't going to be accepted, what can I do? Like, how can I be in this interaction? And for me, what it meant is I always had an exit strategy. So if I would go home for the holidays, or she would come out here, whatever. If she came here, it was pretty easy to like work out. After a time, I used to have her stay at the house. With me and the kids. And then, there were a number of times, like, I didn't want them to see her falling down drunk. Nobody wants their kids to see that. They loved my mother. They still love my mother. They loved her. And she was a really good grandma, but I had to navigate the drinking. And so eventually what it looked like is she would stay at a hotel when she came out. I would get her a hotel nearby, a couple blocks away, so that, it would be, she could go there at the end of the night and my kids wouldn't have to see that. It's hard and it's not ideal, but a lot of us are dealing with a family situation that isn't ideal. Some people are lucky and, great. I hope that, that they appreciate it and they, feel tons of gratitude, but I would say by and large most people are not in that situation. And if you're one of those people, just to know that there's a wide group of people struggling in some way around this time of year, and to reach out. So I hope that this is helpful. I hope that, if you would like to talk more about boundaries and what that looks like, sometimes it does look like, okay, then I'm not coming home. Which is a bummer. For me, it's a last straw to cut people out of our lives, especially if we're talking about family members. But sometimes a person gives you no choice. If it's a situation where you're being emotionally abused, you don't have a choice. Your number one responsibility, and I know this might set airplane analogy, right? The oxygen mask. It's like your number one responsibility is to make sure your own tender heart, like, you are taking care of yourself. You have to do that. You have to advocate on your own behalf. You have to act on your own behalf. You have to not allow yourself to be abused, just like you would, if there was anyone you cared about who was allowing themselves to be abused, you would do everything you could to step in and take them out of that situation. You got to do that for yourself as well. So if that's what we're talking about, you're unfortunately in a situation where you can't keep putting yourself in that kind of environment. It's not going to be okay you can't show up for yourself or anyone else in this world if you are, if your well-being is, if you're just giving it, not putting a high value on it. You're not going to be able to show up for yourself. You're not going to be able to show up for anyone else. You're not going to be able to share, your gifts, like whatever they are. You're not going to be able to bring that stuff to the surface if you're allowing yourself to be abused. So that is a hard line that you really have to honor and think about and figure out, what do those boundaries have to be in order for me to be okay. And then the other part of it is, figuring out what your chosen family is going to look like. Where are your people? If your family of origin if those are not your people for any variety of reasons, like, where are your people? And just to try to, there's a lot of people that have that, that are like, they're having Friendsgiving. They're having holidays with friends, and just to understand that, there's probably more of those people than you know. And if you are feeling alone, I hope that this has been helpful. Also trying to remember that the holidays it's a temporary time of year, and how you feel now is not how you're going to feel forever. And, just to trust in your own ability to heal and strengthen, and keep bringing up and bringing out the best in yourself, which might look like loving people from afar. I hope that you aren't feeling alone, and if you were feeling alone, I hope that you're feeling a lot less alone now. And I'm sending you lots of love. I'm always here for a deeper conversation about any of this. I certainly know a lot about boundaries, and I also know a lot about what happens when you create a boundary and it isn't, honored, and then sort of like reevaluating, I didn't want to not have my mother in my life, so I was always trying to navigate the drinking. And I know a lot about that. If you are in that same situation, you can certainly find me. You know where I am. All right. Wishing you lots of love. Thank you for joining me.